So Mark Zuckerberg admitted to censoring Americans. He released this letter that he wrote to the Honorable Jim Jordan, who's the chairman of the Committee on the Judiciary in the House of Representatives. And he basically says, yeah, okay, the government, the Biden administration pressured me to censor, and I censored some Americans, and I'm not going to do it anymore. We're going to get to the letter. But a lot of people, the reaction to this is that, wow, Mark Zuckerberg has changed his tune. He's no longer going to be censoring Americans. This is amazing that he's admitting to it. And maybe we're actually seeing sort of a sea change happening in social media. And maybe Mark Zuckerberg is going to start standing up for censorship. That is not what is happening here. Let me just tell you right now, Mark Zuckerberg, he is planning on censoring you even more on social media. I'll explain. Let's get to this letter. So he says, Chairman Jordan, I appreciate the committee's interest in content moderation on online platforms. As you are aware, sorry, hold on one second. I got to zoom in on this. I just lost it here. As you are aware, Meta has produced thousands of documents as part of your investigation and made a dozen employees available for transcribed interviews. Further, to our cooperation with your investigation, I welcome the opportunity to share what I've taken away from this process. So he's saying, yeah, you've been investigating us. We've been cooperating with your investigation. So let's talk turkey now, he says. There's a lot of talk right now about around how the US government interacts with companies like Meta. And I want to be clear about our position. Our platforms are for everyone. We're about promoting speech and helping people connect in a safe and secure way. As part of this, we regularly hear from governments around the world and others with various concerns around public discourse and public safety. So Facebook has been not just scrutinized by Democrats who want them to censor COVID misinformation and information about the elections and Russian disinformation and all of these things, but Facebook gets a lot of pressure around the world. Facebook was, I guess, blamed or credited, depending on which side you're on, for helping, for example, the spread of the Arab Spring throughout the Middle East. There's been a lot of government uprisings that people have pointed at Facebook for being really the platform that people used in order to get together to form whatever uprising they were doing. So he's got a lot of governments coming after him. So he says in 2021, senior officials from the Biden administration, including the White House, repeatedly pressured our teams for months to censor certain COVID-19 content, including humor and satire, and expressed a lot of frustration with our teams when we didn't agree. Ultimately, it was our decision whether or not to take content down, and we own our decisions, including COVID-19 related changes we made to our enforcement in the wake of this pressure. I believe the government pressure was wrong, and I regret that we were not more outspoken about it. I also think we made some choices that, with the benefit of hindsight and new information, we wouldn't make today. Like I said to our teams at the time, I feel strongly that we should not compromise our content standards due to pressure from any administration in either direction. And we're ready to push back if something like this happens again. It won't happen again because he's going to be censoring us even more, which I'll get to. He says, in a separate situation, the FBI warned us about a potential Russian disinformation operation about the Biden family and Burisma in the lead up to the 2020 election. That fall, when we saw a New York Post story reporting on corruption allegations involving then Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden's family, we sent that story to fact checkers for review and temporarily demoted it while waiting for a reply. So he's talking about the laptop story, the Hunter Biden laptop story. New York Post came out with it, and suddenly everybody said it was Russian disinformation. Now we know it was totally a true story. So he says, we've changed our policies and processes to make sure this doesn't happen again. For instance, we no longer temporarily demote things in the US while waiting for fact checkers. So they're just going to kind of let it rip, and then they'll fact check and then take it down after the fact, is what that would imply. But I don't think that's actually what's going to happen. He says, apart from content moderation, I want to address the contributions I made during the last presidential cycle to support electoral infrastructure. So he's talking about his campaign donations. He says the idea here was to make sure local election jurisdictions across the country had the resources they needed to help people vote safely during a global pandemic. I made these contributions through the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. They were designed to be nonpartisan, spread across urban, rural, and suburban communities. Still, despite the analysis I've seen showing otherwise, I know that some people believe this work benefited one party over the other. My goal is to be neutral and not play a role one way or another. or to even appear to be playing a role. So I don't plan on making a similar contribution this cycle. Respectfully, Mark Zuckerberg. So he's saying, look, I'm not going to be donating to who you think Democrats. I'm not going to be donating to Democrats. I'm not pro-Democrat. I'm not going to play a role. And Facebook and Meta in general are not going to be censoring content in either direction. And we're not going to take any pressure from any of these, from any administration, whether they be Republican or Democrat. Okay. This all sounds nice. A lot of people reading this letter say, well, Mike Zuckerberg changed his tune. Let me just play an interview for you. This is from, this is right after the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. Couple of things to notice as you're watching this video, this clip from the interview. First of all, Zuckerberg has changed. He talks like a human. He sounds human and not robotic. It's like he's come out of his shell. He's a late bloomer. He's kind of finally figured out that he is a human being. He's been doing a lot of crazy stuff online. If you notice, he does a lot of wakeboarding or like surfing. He's really good at it. He's doing all of these things, holding an American flag, drinking a beer, and like surfing. He's gotten in with, he's wearing different clothes. He's got like a whole different style and vibe to him these days. So it's just something to kind of take note of. But listen to what he says when he talks about content moderate, not so much content moderation, but listen to what he says when he talks about what Meta platforms are for. Watch this.
I want to talk about the 2024 presidential election.
Okay.
Facebook has been a flashpoint in many elections around the world, and you personally have been called out, most recently by former President Trump. This is a big election. What do you think is at stake?
Well, I mean, look, it's obviously a very important, and it'll be a historic election. I feel like I'm best positioned maybe to talk about what our role will be in it and what we're going to do. And look, I mean, the main thing that I hear from people is that they actually want to see less political content on our services because they come to our services to connect with people. So, that's what we're going to do, where we give people control over this, but we're generally trying to recommend less political content. So I think you're going to see our services play less of a role in this election than they have in the past. And personally, I'm also planning on not playing a significant role in the election. I've done some stuff personally in the past. I'm not planning on doing that this time. And that includes, not endorsing either of the candidates. Now, look, I mean, there's obviously a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world. I mean, the historic events over the weekend. And I mean, on a personal note, it's, seeing Donald Trump get up after getting shot in the face and pump his fist in the air with the American flag is one of the most badass things I've ever seen in my life. But, and I think, look, at some level as an American, it's like hard to not get kind of emotional about that spirit and that fight. And I think that's why a lot of people like the guy. But look, I mean, we're living in a pretty crazy time, and I view our role here is to make it so that everyone can express their views on this stuff, but we're going to try to manage it so that way the politics doesn't drown out the human connection and the community, which is, I think, the main thing that people come to our services for. And we're not always going to get that right, but that's what we're going to try to do, and I think that's probably the best role that we can play.
It almost seems like he got a reverse lobotomy. He's like, got personality and doesn't sound like a robot. It's kind of amazing. But anyway, if you listen to what he says, our role is, let's talk about our role, Meta. What is our role going to be in this next election? He says, our users report wanting less political content. So this is how he's telling you he's going to censor you without saying, I'm going to censor you harder. Because I don't even want to deal with it. Rather than choosing sides and censoring only one, I'm just going to censor everybody. Any political content, we're just going to censor it. How he phrases it is, we're going to recommend less political content. He says our users, and he's framing it like our users want this. Our users want less political content. So we're going to recommend less political content on our platform, meaning the Meta platforms, which is Facebook, Instagram, those are not going to be for political content anymore. Facebook, this is going to be really challenging. It's going to be interesting to see how Meta deals with this because, Yeah, I understand Instagram. People don't really put a lot of political content there. That's more for like travel and food and beauty and fashion and people and photography. People are taking photographs of things. But Facebook in particular, this is a platform where a lot of older people are there. Younger people have kind of abandoned Facebook. Older people are still there and they're political. They want to get involved. They want to talk. They want to tell their political viewpoints to their family members and to their friends. And they want to watch shows on Facebook. The older generation is still very much on Facebook. The boomers, they're all over Facebook. And they're also really political. And they also vote more than the younger generation. So it's going to be interesting to see how Facebook does this, how they're going to censor political content on a platform where people are posting a lot of political content. And Zuckerberg is saying flat out, you're just not going to see it. They're just pretty much going to censor all of it in all directions. Now, that also being said, one of the reasons why we know that they're going to be censoring more is because they have been censoring. So he could talk and say, oh, no, what's our role? We don't really want to be involved. We want less political content. Meanwhile, they've been censoring, in particular, pro-Palestine content. What Mark Zuckerberg he's trying to play it off like he's cool. He's trying to play it off. He's really just trying to play both sides. He's trying to say, he's saying, oh, yeah, and it was absolutely a badass moment to watch Trump pump his fist in the air after being shot in the face and nearly being killed. That was so unbelievably American, such an embodiment of our nation's spirit. Whether you like Donald Trump or not, I know the people that hate him are gagging and thinking that it's he staged it. No, there's just no way. I don't know anybody who's dumb enough to stage somebody just grazing their ear no matter how great of a shot they are. But that was a really amazing, I think about that moment and I do think that was a really amazing moment. And Mark's talking about that. And he's also writing this letter to Jim Jordan, a Republican, and trying to say, hey, we're not going to, yeah, we did it, but we're not going to do it anymore. Sorry about that, bro. But then he goes and he censors. He's afraid. He's afraid of the government. That's what he's showcasing. He's afraid. They're censoring any sort of pro-Palestine content on Facebook. And I don't know if that's because Zuckerberg himself is a giant Zionist. Maybe he is. Or maybe he's just afraid of the government because they basically labeled anybody who says free Palestine as a terrorist. They're putting people on terrorist watch lists for being pro-Palestine, for saying free Palestine. They're trying to equate them to Hamas. And it's not just America. He's got to worry about that around the world. Look at what's gone on with all of these journalists that arrive in the UK and they get detained and held and questioned and charged. And you've got Richard Medhurst, who's potentially facing 10, 12, 15 years in jail, in prison for journalism. And that's what Mark Zuckerberg, I think, is more afraid of than anything. He's seeing, now this interview, of course, was before the CEO of Telegram was arrested, but the trend has been there and these guys can see that. And I think they're running scared of these governments and instead they would rather abandon political content altogether. And I think that's what Zuckerberg's saying is like, look, I don't want to mess with anything you guys are going to think is terrorism. So anything that you guys are going to think is terrorism or anti-Semitism, we're just going to rip it off the internet. Anything that you guys are going to jail me for, go after me for, we're just going to get rid of it. And that means getting rid of practically everything. All political content, which means not more free speech for us, but actually less free speech. That's what Mark Zuckerberg is saying with his letter. That's what he's saying with this interview. That's what we're seeing happening in reality on Facebook through Meta is censorship. So we're not living in a hooray moment. Wow, Mark Zuckerberg seeing the light. No, we're living in a moment where he's talking about more censorship. So prepare for more censorship. Prepare for them to control the narrative even more. They being the establishment, the powers that be, whoever it is, just prepare for a continued onslaught on free speech. That is what we're witnessing. All right, guys, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Comment down below your thoughts. You can also email me, Kim@KimIverson.com. Thanks for watching.